My name is Renee Castillo. I'm 39 years old, and for 13 years I've worked as a certified fire investigator, which means when a building burns down, I'm the person who walks through the wreckage afterward and reads exactly what happened from the way the fire moved, the way concrete spalls, the way a pour pattern spreads across a floor when someone helps a fire along instead of letting it start on its own. 3 days before my brother-in-law's insurance claim was due, I stood in the char of his warehouse with a receipt in my pocket that he didn't know I'd found. And the insurance adjuster, standing beside me, waiting for my professional read, had no idea that 40 minutes later, my own report was about to tell him something this family had spent a week making sure nobody would ever ask about. Welcome back to MJ Drama Stories, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever been asked to call something an accident that you already knew wasn't one, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I've worked as a certified fire investigator for 13 years, the last 7 as an independent consultant, hired by insurance carriers, and occasionally by defense attorneys to determine origin and cause, the careful, methodical work of reading a burned structure the way other people read a room. Fire leaves a record if you know how to find it, the V pattern that shows where it started, the depth of char that shows how long it burned in one place, the specific signatures that separate an accidental electrical fault from something poured and lit. My job isn't to give anyone the answer they need for a claim to move faster. It's to tell the truth the fire actually left behind, because that's the only thing standing between an honest claim and a fraudulent one, and sometimes between an accident and a crime nobody's looked at hard enough yet. My quirk, if you want to call it that, is that I can't smell any kind of smoke, a campfire, a barbecue, a candle someone forgot to blow out, without unconsciously trying to place it. The specific chemical signature that separates wood smoke from something accelerant-based, the way some people can't help identifying a song from 3 notes. My husband, Desmond, no, that's someone else's husband. Mine is named Aldo, and he calls it doing the nose thing and has learned to just wait it out at cookouts. It's a small, mostly harmless habit. It had never once in 13 years cost me a relationship. It was about to be the only reason a family didn't get away with something that could have cost someone their freedom, or worse, hurt someone the next time. I grew up close to my sister Bianca and her husband, Marcus, who'd spent 9 years building Castillo Reyes Freight Storage, a modest warehousing business outside Fresno that stored equipment and dry goods for a handful of local agricultural clients. Marcus's younger brother, Dev, ran day-to-day operations while Marcus handled sales. I'd consulted informally for the business a few times over the years, off the books, on fire code questions, the way you do for family. That closeness had never once, in 13 years, felt like something that could work against me, until, apparently, it did. The message came on a Sunday evening, from Bianca, shaken and urgent the way important things in my family always arrive dressed. Renee, there was a fire at the warehouse Friday night. Everyone's okay, but the insurance company wants an independent investigator before they'll process the claim. Can you do it? We trust you more than some stranger. Then, a separate text landed just for me an hour later, from Marcus. Hey, just call it the electrical panel. That's obviously what it was. We can't afford this claim getting delayed or denied. Business is already hanging by a thread. Just call it the electrical panel. I'd hear some version of that sentence twice more before that week was through. It had never once, until that Sunday, made the back of my neck go cold. Here's the backstory, because none of what happened at that warehouse makes sense without it. Castillo Reyes Freight Storage had been struggling for over a year. A major client had pulled out 6 months earlier, and the business was 3 payments behind on a bank loan secured against the building itself. With the bank's foreclosure clock quietly ticking in the background of every family dinner nobody discussed out loud. The warehouse's electrical panel genuinely was old, original to the building's 1987 construction, and Dev had mentioned it needing an upgrade more than once over the years, which made electrical fault a plausible, almost reasonable-sounding explanation for a fire that had in fact started somewhere else entirely. I want to be honest about the part of this that isn't noble, because if I only tell you the principled version, you won't understand why I drove out to that warehouse Monday morning, instead of insisting the insurance company assign a fully independent investigator with 0 family connection, the way I probably should have. Bianca is the person who'd flown across the country the week my own marriage nearly fell apart, 3 years back, and sat on my kitchen floor with me until 2 a.m. without once telling me what to do about it. Some part of me, the part that still owed her more patience and grace than I could ever count evenly, wanted so badly to believe this was simply a scared family catching a lucky, boring break. An old panel finally failing. Nothing more sinister than bad wiring and worse timing. I told myself doing the investigation myself was protecting them from a stranger's assumptions. I understood walking into that char on Monday morning that I might actually be about to find out whether I was protecting them from anything at all. I told Aldo about the second text over dinner, and he set his fork down with the specific stillness he uses right before saying something I don't want to hear. Just call it the electrical panel isn't a request for your professional judgment, he said. It's someone telling you the conclusion before you've even walked the scene. I told him it was probably just Marcus being anxious about the claim, nothing more sinister than money stress. He looked at me the way you look at someone about to walk calmly into a building they already suspect isn't what it seems. Renee, you've spent 13 years reading exactly this kind of scene for a living. Why would this one be the exception? I went anyway. Some doors you keep walking back through even after you've learned exactly what's usually behind them, because the family on the other side of this one held your hand through your own worst year, and some part of you still owes that a fair look before you assume the worst. Stay with me here, because what I found in that warehouse over the next 2 hours, I ended up assembling the way I assemble every scene I've ever worked, one detail at a time, until the details stop being separate and start being a pattern. I arrived Monday morning with the insurance adjuster, a careful, unhurried man named Grantham Weiss, and the property's char told its own story before either of us said a word. Marcus met us at the perimeter, cheerful in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes, gesturing toward the northeast corner, where the electrical panel sat, scorched but structurally recognizable. Should be pretty obvious once you're in there, he said. That panel's been a problem for years. He said it like a statement dressed as a question, which is its own kind of tell. Stay with me, because what happened over the next 90 minutes I planned in about the time it takes to trace a fire's actual point of origin. I did what I always do first. I ignored what anyone told me the answer was and started at the least burned edges of the structure, working inward toward the deepest char, letting the fire's own physics lead me rather than a family's hopeful narrative. The electrical panel, when I finally reached it, showed damage consistent with the fire having burned through that area. But the char depth around it was shallower than the char depth I found roughly 40 feet away, near a stack of empty pallets close to the loading bay door, where the floor showed a distinct, irregular pour pattern spreading outward in the specific spidering shape accelerant makes when poured, rather than the fire's own natural spread. I knelt in that spot a long time, running an accelerant detection swab, because that's what I do when a scene tells me something my life hasn't caught up to yet. This wasn't an old panel finally giving out. The fire's actual point of origin was 40 feet from that panel, on bare concrete, in a pattern that doesn't happen by accident. I didn't say anything to Marcus or Grantham right away. I did the only thing 13 years of training has ever taught my hands to do on instinct. I photographed and sampled the pour pattern exactly where it sat, logged the chain of custody the way I would for any scene, and kept walking the perimeter with my face carefully neutral. Near the loading bay's side entrance, half covered by a fallen sheet of drywall, I found a gas station receipt, partially burned but legible, dated the Wednesday before the fire, 3 days earlier, for a 5-gallon fuel container purchase, time-stamped at a station 11 minutes from the warehouse. I turned it over in gloved hands and read it twice. It wasn't proof of who, not yet. But it was proof of when, and when was 3 days before a fire that everyone standing outside wanted me to call an accident. I bagged the receipt, logged it, and walked back out into the daylight, holding nothing but my clipboard, smiling the smile you smile when you've just found out the story you were handed didn't match the floor. 20 minutes later, near the trucks, Marcus caught Bianca's eye and gave a small, hopeful nod, the second delivery, though I wouldn't clock it as such until later that afternoon. Renee knows fire scenes better than anybody, he told Grantham, patting my shoulder. She'll confirm the panel. I smiled back. I did not mention the receipt. Not yet. By that afternoon, Grantham had his preliminary paperwork open, and Marcus steered the moment toward me with the practiced ease of a man closing a claim he'd already mentally finished. We just need your read for the report, he said, so we can get this moving before the bank calls the loan. Call it the panel, Renee, and we're through the worst of this. Bianca looked at me, hopeful, exhausted, a year of financial fear sitting behind her eyes. Marcus's hand found my shoulder. Light, almost warm. Just call it the panel, he said. Quiet enough for just our small circle, and there it was, the third delivery, dressed up as family shorthand and functioning as a demand. I let the silence sit. 5 full seconds, maybe 6, long enough that I heard a forklift idling somewhere in the yard, long enough that Marcus's hand went very still on my shoulder. Long enough that Bianca's hopeful expression started to work at holding itself in place. "The fire didn't start at the panel," I said to Grantham directly, because he was the one whose report actually decided anything. "It started 40 feet away, on bare concrete, in a pour pattern consistent with an accelerant. I have samples going to the lab, and I found a receipt for a 5-gallon fuel container purchased 3 days before the fire, 11 minutes from this address." Marcus's face did the thing faces do when a sentence doesn't parse the way they'd planned for it to. "That's Renee. That doesn't mean anything. People buy gas cans for lawnmowers. This is insane." "I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet," I said. And I said it to Grantham, not to Marcus, because he was the one with a professional obligation to act on it before the claim moved forward. "I'm reporting what the scene actually shows, which is an origin point and pattern inconsistent with electrical failure, plus a piece of physical evidence found at that scene. That's my job. What happens with it from here isn't mine to decide." Dev, who'd been standing quietly at the edge of the group all morning, tried a second run at it, stepping forward too fast. "This is crazy. You're going to ruin us over a gas can receipt that could belong to anybody." And I held up a hand, the way you hold up a hand to a client trying to talk over a finding mid-sentence. His second attempt landed softer than the first and got him even less, mostly because of how fast he'd moved to defend a receipt nobody had named him on yet. Bianca tried a third angle, pivoting the way people always pivot, from demand to injury. "Renee, please. This is my family. Our whole life is in that building." And I said the sentence I'd been building, without knowing it, for 13 years. Calm, not loud. I didn't owe her loud. "You asked me to call this an accident I already knew wasn't one, in front of the adjuster deciding a real insurance claim. I'm not doing that. I never was going to, once I saw the pattern on that floor." The lab confirmed accelerant residue at the origin point within the week. The insurance claim was formally suspended pending a fraud investigation, and the receipt, combined with security footage from the gas station Grantham subpoenaed independently, eventually tied the purchase to Dev, who'd made it using his own card, apparently believing a warehouse fire blamed on old wiring would quietly solve the family's foreclosure problem. Before anyone thought to check further than the panel, everyone was already primed to blame. I want to be fair to Dev, because he wasn't a cartoon villain in this, and I think that matters more than the tidy version of this story would want it to. He'd watched his brother's marriage strain under the loan payments for a year, had genuinely convinced himself he was protecting the whole family rather than committing a crime, and had never once, he told investigators later, actually intended for anyone to be hurt. The fire had been set on a Friday night specifically because he knew the warehouse would be empty. That didn't make it not arson, but it made it something closer to a scared man's desperate math than the cartoonish villainy the story could have flattened him into. Marcus and Bianca were not charged. The investigation found no evidence either had known about Dev's plan in advance, though the strain of that discovery nearly ended their marriage on its own. 6 weeks later, Bianca called me, crying, not defending Dev exactly, just grieving the family she'd thought she had. "I keep thinking about how close I came to asking you to just make it easier," she said. "I didn't understand what easier actually meant until I saw what it would have cost. I didn't need that call to feel finished with what had happened. But I won't pretend it didn't matter. It did. Here's what 13 years of reading other people's fire scenes finally taught me about my own family. Being trusted to call something an accident isn't the same as being trusted with the truth about whether it was one. One is a function. The other is a choice, made by following the char and the pattern wherever they actually lead. Not something you write down because a family standing in the ashes of their own business needs the easier word more than they need the true one. That's my story. So want more, stop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to MJ Drama Stories, because there's another one waiting for you next week.